Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching India's World with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. India and South Africa on Friday sealed a 3-year strategic program to further boost cooperation in a number of key areas after talks between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. In his media statement, Prime Minister Modi said both sides discussed all aspects of the bilateral ties with an aim to further expand cooperation in diverse areas. Ramaphosa said his country was looking at a result-oriented partnership with India through implementation of the 3-year strategic exchange program. The strategic program will cover cooperation in a range of areas including defense and security, trade and investment, the blue economy, tourism, IT and agriculture. President Ramaphosa, who arrived in Delhi on Friday morning, was the chief guest at the Republic Day parade on Saturday. It was the 4th meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Ramaphosa within a year. On this edition of India as well, we will analyze the warming of ties between India and South Africa. Joining me on the program today are Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, former ambassador, Sriram Chaulia, Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, and Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, Director, India Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. What were the key takeaways for you as far as President Ramaphosa's visit to India is concerned?
Well, first of all, I think was the timing. Quite apart from the fact that, in the background we have the, the very visible high priority the present government has been giving to Africa, which is a refreshing change from some decades ago. I mean, if you count the number of visits made by our president, vice president, the ministers and others, it's at an all-time high. The Africa summits, regardless of some complaints on implementation, have been another indicator of this fact, and so on. But the timing, I say, because Cyril Ramaphosa is now heading for elections in South Africa exactly at the same time as we are heading for elections, May 2019. Cyril is an extremely interesting figure. He was one of the leaders of the trade union movement of South Africa, which was, in a sense, the crucible from which the struggle against apartheid was launched over the many years. He was the chief negotiator under Nelson Mandela with the white apartheid regime, which led to the new constitution and independence. And subsequently, he became probably South Africa's most prominent businessman after independence because he joined the world of business. So he's got a trade union background, a business background, and an ANC background as a major ANC leader. So he's got all those credentials that augur well for the ANC, which has been recently under very strong attack from opponents because of the Jacob Zuma regime, which was seen to be utterly and totally corrupt in collaboration with that notorious Gupta family of Indian origin. But with Cyril and whatever little he can manage to do in the short time he has, it looks definitely as though the ANC certainly will be in the majority. The opposition Democratic Party is still seen to a large extent as the white party, even though they are trying to change that. So the fact that he is visiting at this time as the chief guest of our Republic on our Republic Day augurs well for the political relationship continuing to be on an upswing. Quite apart from that, I don't set too much store by just the fact of the signing of this catch-all agreement, as it's being called. It's a very good thing because in one sense that it implies that from both sides, it implies that we are not really bothered about the number of agreements we sign. We want to get things done.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
One agreement is enough because of, everybody knows the background of India-South Africa relations, the support for the liberation movements and so on and so forth. The South Africans are very fond of saying that you gave us a lawyer called Gandhi, we gave you the Mahatma. So in the years after independence, within the first 10, 15, 18 years, there are agreements and MOUs existing in every sector. So all we need to do now is build on that. And I think the sectors that were mentioned in your report are exactly those sectors in which priority is being given from both sides. The defense cooperation, unlike what many in India, what many in India don't know is that South Africa is a major producer of defense equipment, which in fact certain technologies which even the West, they refined even the technologies of the West that they borrowed,
Right.
Because they had to do it under the years of, they were under sanctions.
Sure.
So yes, the priority areas mentioned there, trade and economic relations, defense, the blue economy, especially cooperation now in multilateral fora, where because we are so close together, we tend to cooperate.
Absolutely.
Like BRICS, like the Indian Ocean Rim. It's a very active agenda that exists and is strengthened because of this visit.
Sure.
But as always, and it bears repetition, although we all repeat it ad nauseam, everything depends on a sustainable implementation.
Absolutely. There are agreements across sectors is what the ambassador has pointed out. We need to work on the deliverables really going forward is what he's suggesting. Let me bring in the General into the picture now. General, what were the key takeaways from you from a defense and a strategic point of view?
I think what has happened is, and this happened a little bit earlier, it happened in 2018, was the Denel company of South Africa that was taken away out of the blacklist. Now, if you want to go a little bit into the history, this started actually, there were a series of defense agreements which were signed between India and South Africa during the period 1999 to 2005. And during this period, about 6 odd agreements had been signed. Basically, it pertained to the purchase of the anti-material rifle. And we were purchasing, I think, a few hundred of them. And when that got embroiled into a corruption deal.
The bunker busters.
These are the bunker. Actually, when you're looking at the AMR, it has got multiple functions. One is, it's got a range between 1.5 to 2 kilometers. It can destroy a bunker. That is the ammunition which is used. It could also be used against softer targets like vehicles. I mean, not against tanks or something, but against trucks, jeeps, light vehicles, radars, and at some cases, you also use it against snipers. Right. So it depends on the type of ammunition which you use. And this particular thing, we were supposed to get 400 of these AMRs, but we only by the time we had got 100, then the deal got scuttled. And that got scuttled because of the emphasis that money had been paid to outside sources. Now, ultimately, it was found out that there was nothing of this could be proved. And in 2014, a clean chit was given to Denel. Now, Denel actually is a government-owned company. It is not a private company. It is a government-owned company. And I'm rather surprised that actually if something like this had happened, it happened with a government-owned company. These things generally happen with private operators. Anyway, from 2014, the sanctions should have been lifted, but it took another 4 years due to various reasons, cases in court, etc. 2018, finally, it was cleared. Now, I think now the time has come and you can once again cooperate with Denel as far as weapons and ammunition is concerned. In the meantime, India has also started manufacturing the anti-material rifle, and 400 of them have been procured and given to the BSF. The army hasn't taken it on so far. I think that must be, they've got certain sensitivities with respect to the weight and other criteria. But that notwithstanding, I think over a period of time, India should start manufacturing these on its own. We are manufacturing it in one of our ordnance factories, which is being supplied to the BSF. I think the greater thing which cooperation can actually take place now is in the development of ammunition. I think it's a sad state as far as the ordnance factories are concerned, but the way we manufacture our ammunition is really not up to, as of now, world standards. And I think it will be good if both the private sector, Denel, and some of these ordnance factories, if they could actually get into some sort of cooperative agreement based on what we are really doing now. That the FDI has been opened out, and it is above 50%. So if we can get onto some sort of these structures, South Africa is very good in missiles. They are very good in ammunition. They are very good in artillery guns. Artillery guns, I think it's over now because we have already got the M777. The K9 is on. It's a very good gun. And we've also got our own Indian-made, the Dhanush, which is a copy of the erstwhile Bofors. So as far as artillery is concerned, I think things are looking up for India, and we are doing it indigenously.
Right.
But I think in ammunition and in missile technology, both there could be a lot of inter-cooperation between the two. I think there's also a lot of scope for cooperation in space.
All right.
So that is where I think we need to, as of now, when we're looking at actually defense cooperation between the two countries. We'll talk about exercises a bit later, but I'm talking about the Make in India part of it so far.
Sure.
So in Make in India, I think there's a great deal which can be done, and I think it will benefit both the countries.
Absolutely. You know, Professor, the ambassador touched upon this aspect of it, you know, the historic ties between India and South Africa. Now, that's noteworthy, isn't it?
Yes, this is the 150th anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi and the 100th of Mandela. It's just a great coincidence that these two, you know, great personalities have a round figure of 150 and 100 coinciding in the same year, 2019. So I think the Madiba-Mahatma connection, yes, we continue to emphasize that. But Frank, also even in the civilian side, you see, if you look at India's overall trade with Africa, it's on a growth trajectory like nearly 70 billion US last year. And out of that, more than 10 or close to 10 is contributed only by South Africa. So South Africa is, in terms of the exchange, one of the principal pillars for India's Africa strategy. And that has to do with the history, that has to do with the migration patterns. We have nearly 1.5 million people of Indian origin in South Africa, many of whom fought against apartheid and were very close associates of Nelson Mandela. And we also want to talk about, you know, agriculture and industry, because this, you remember 2018, Frank, Prime Minister laid out our 10-point guidelines for what India wants to do in Africa. And this is a very important marker in our maturation of our Africa policy. And one of the points he said was that, you know, that we, Africa is 60% of the world's arable land, but it produces only 10% of the world's agriculture output, and we want to support enhancement of that. So number of Indian companies are involved in, you know, taking land and for commercial farming and then exporting the produce from Africa back to India as well as to other parts of the world. Some of them have been successful companies, a few have been controversial, but overall that's one contribution. The other, of course, is with industry, I mean, and services also. You look at a company like Bharti, for example, they have 78 million subscribers in Africa, including in parts of West Africa like Ghana, Nigeria, you know, so essentially, and then you look at the Pan-African e-network and other ways by which India is connecting Africa. That's a huge contribution we're doing, and they value us a lot. And last but not least is, you come to the defense, you see the emphasis on naval cooperation. I see that it has been increased lately with South Africa. And the reason for that is obvious. One, you know, we say that we are against non-traditional threats like piracy and, you know, drug smuggling and human smuggling and those kind of things. But the unstated objective is, of course, that we want to preserve a kind of Indian Ocean that we say is free of any kind of hegemonic players, and the advancement of the People's Liberation Army Navy in this region is quite high. They have, you know, this is part of the Belt and Road for them initiative, and it's part of the maritime commons where they are increasingly, muscling through. So I think it's important for us to show that we are also cognizant of the western flank of the Indian Ocean. And you see the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium and Indian Ocean Rim Association, both of these had India and South Africa almost as co-founders. Right. South Africa from the beginning, you know, has been wanting India to be there so as not to be falling into, you know, the lap of the Chinese, so to say, although they do have very strong, you know, Chinese connections and investments and loans as well. So I think Rwanda and South Africa, Frank, these are the two officially stated strategic partners for India in Africa. And I think we should expand it to Nigeria and to Ghana as well, which is a little further away. And then we will have a series of capable states with whom we have a strong strategic understanding. When we say strategic relations, is different from, you know, simply having trade and commerce, right? So we are talking about defense plus trade plus people to people, and of course reforming the international institutions. South Africa is one of the contenders to have the permanent seat in the UN Security Council along with Nigeria, and we have often been coordinating with them. So you look at all of these, there's great convergence of interests.
Absolutely. There is great, convergence really as far as both the countries are concerned. But Ambassador, what I would like to, find out from you is that are there any areas or a particular area that we need to concentrate on going forward?
Actually, I would hesitate to lift one particular item and say this is the most important thing for us. In fact, I think that would be absolutely the wrong way to go about it.
But any areas that need special attention, maybe?
Why can't we give special attention to everything important? I
Right.
mean, within our own country and abroad. For instance, I would say the most important thing is to not have a policy which is simply catch up with China kind of thinking. I mean, you know, there's a huge literature in the world now in think tanks and foreign offices and in the public domain, in academia, about China and India and Africa. There are books which are called China and India and Africa. Now, which leads to a perception in India that China is doing so much, China has got deep pockets, China is muscling in Africa in every way, and we have to catch up with China. That, those of us who've served in Africa and who claim to know a little bit of the situation in Africa and different countries, there are two conclusions which I feel are incontrovertible. Number one, it is impossible to have a pan-Africa policy on everything. Africa is 54 countries. Sub-Saharan Africa is 49, 50 countries. There are vastly different, levels of achievement and size and development in these countries. Botswana is not the same as Nigeria. South Africa is not the same as the Central African Republic, and so on. The historical connotations are completely different in West Africa and East Africa and Southern Africa and so on. So while it is useful to have a policy geared to addressing Africa as a whole politically, because there is an African Union, Africans tend to talk on international platforms as Africans very often. While that has to be kept in mind, and our diplomacy keeps it in mind, the fact is that on the ground when you're implementing things, whether it's defense, as the General pointed out, or economy or trade or all these factors, we have to address ourselves to the needs of the particular country we are addressing. If there are regional groupings like ECOWAS, the East African Community, SADC, then we should sustain the bilateral involvement with the regional involvement, which is actually what we are doing, and we should do it even more. And then, of course, keeping up our links with the African Union. All these things go together.
Right.
So the most important thing I would like to stress is that keeping away from the trap of catch up with China kind of feeling, what we have to do is see what we have done in Africa so far and what we have, where we have succeeded now. I'll just give you one example.
Right.
That can be multiplied in various other sectors. We have to see what our endowments are. We can't live in a fairy tale world where India and Africa are, reached miraculous levels of cooperation and trade and so on and so forth without the effort going into it. And there we have to see what are our endowments. Now, if you look at what we've done in Africa, we've done a lot. Our private sector has done a lot. Our government credits have achieved a lot. We all complain that it's not enough and the potential is even more, but that's true for various other situations. Now, you take one area, as I said, capacity building. No country, whether in the West, I say this after a dozen years of experience in Africa, no country, Western, the US, UK, China, whatever, can match us in the cost and quality of the delivery of capacity building, skills, education, education in every sector, technical education, vocational education, scholarships to African students for India. The combination of quality and cost in capacity building, which is a crying need across the board in Africa,
right.
India is matchless. Our institutions, our teachers, our experts, the way we do it is far less expensive than anybody in the West of equal quality, and far better than what China can offer, because they do have a language problem as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we need to identify these endowments. We need to work on them in a very sustainable fashion and a very active fashion. The Africa summits have shown very clearly that India is willing to put money where its mouth is. Now we have to put that money in the right direction.
Absolutely. All right. Focus on the strengths really going forward is what the ambassador is suggesting. General, of what strategic importance really is South Africa to India and vice versa?
No, I think, when you're looking at South Africa, see the location of South Africa vis-a-vis the oceans. And you look at the location of India vis-a-vis the oceans, you see. and you are straddling, both the two countries are straddling key points. So when we are looking at both India and South Africa, you know that the Western Ocean, the Indian Ocean gets covered. That I think is a very important aspect, because we've had a series of exercises, naval exercises with South Africa. Actually, it's called the IPSA series of exercises. You know, it is India, Brazil, and South Africa. It's called the IPSA-MAR, MAR, the IPSA, India, Brazil, South Africa Maritime Exercises. And last year was the sixth of them, which was held in Simontown in South Africa. Now, I think this sends a very important signal, because the warships, we had about 6 warships participating in that exercise, India itself. So you have the South African Navy, you have the Brazil Navy, and you have the Indian Navy operating in these waters. Now, I think this sends a very strong signal. The other strong signal which goes across as far as India is concerned is the Quad. You know, when you're looking at India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. So that covers the other half of the ocean, you know, leading on to the Indo-Pacific. So here we are looking at the Indian Ocean, we look across into the Atlantic, and then we are looking at the Indian Ocean proper. So the key, when we're looking at the future, the key is the waterways. You see, anything which is going to happen when we're looking into the future, the prosperity and security will lie on these waters.
Right.
So the cooperation which India has with South Africa, considering South Africa's strategic location in the Indian Ocean, and considering India's central location in the Indian Ocean, I think it makes for a very strong degree of convergence. And this series of exercises is very, very helpful to both.
Absolutely.
One more aspect I would just like to mention, you see what the ambassador very rightly said, you see our foreign policy has been one of the success stories of the last 5 years. In fact, I have never seen a more rejuvenated foreign policy than what has been shown in the last 5 years. And this has also been exhibited in Africa. But besides that foreign policy, one thing which has been working consistently for decades now has been the Indian involvement in peacekeeping operations in Africa. And I think the role of the Indian armed forces and certain other elements, sometimes the BSF and CRPF have also sent their contingents there. They have played a very, very positive role in building up a particular image of India per se.
Right.
I think where we still lack is as the ambassador very rightly pointed out, is while the foreign policy has been a success, the implementation models have not really matched up with the same speed or fervor as the foreign policy has set it out to be.
Sure.
And once we can do that matching, I don't think we need to worry about China. We need to worry about India. And once we get our own act together, I think then we are in a very strong situation. But the key really, when you're looking at the next decade or the next 2 decades, the key is going to be the waters of the Atlantic, the waters of the Indian Ocean, and leading on to the Pacific.
Right. Professor, how do both countries boost ties even further going forward?
Well, to follow from General Katoch, I would like to add, peacekeeping capacities. South Africa is trying to develop a 25,000 strong indigenous African peacekeeping force, so that they don't have to be dependent on, external forces whenever they have insurrections or rebellions or civil war type situations, which unfortunately have been quite a few in Africa. South Africa is taking the lead, and Nigeria wants to do the same for Mali and these kind of places where there is, jihadist extremist threat and so on in West Africa. So this is where, I think India, with its rich experience in peacekeeping, we need to be collaborating very closely with them to nurture and develop, their peacekeeping capabilities, especially at the level of, rank and file soldiers. And our own, we have sent thousands of peacekeepers to the African continent, and some of them have even given their lives in South Sudan and in Congo and all that. So these are all, highly appreciated by the South Africans and the Nigerians especially. So I think we need to take it forward. The other thing is, there's a new development, which is a Pan-African Continental Free Trade Area. This has been signed recently, and almost half of the AU member countries have already are on board. And this is actually reducing tariff and custom barriers across within the AU member countries.
Sure.
And so if we have a base like South Africa, where we are exporting more than to other countries, from which to pass on to Mozambique and Zambia and then go further into the continent, this is like a wonderful opportunity to enhance trade, especially our exports. And last, I will also say that, you see, when we do capacity building, I've always been a believer that we must also have, some trained young Indians like the US Peace Corps, who would be positioned in key countries in Africa at the grassroots with the support of the Indian government and imparting, computer skills, math, English, and all these things that will build a long-term goodwill for us at the grassroots.
Right.
Already there is an Indian community, especially in Kenya and Tanzania and South Africa. These are the three big hubs for us, for the diaspora. But I'm talking about Indians from here, going there on short-term basis and, living with the community, working with the community. Maybe some private corporations can also chip in and finance this kind of initiative. We need something new, apart from, already we have high-tech programs and trainings in, all kinds of things in agriculture, in irrigation, in solar electricity. There's a whole variety of these things. But what I'm suggesting is a more longer-term civilian presence there with a purpose to build our soft power in Africa further.
All right. A quick closing comment from you, Ambassador, on the best way forward for both nations.
Well, I think we more or less have a consensus here that there is if not wonderful, but at least a totally workable, solid foundation that has already been laid, and that we need to do more of the same. We need to implement better, keeping in mind the endowments that we have. I talked about capacity building. The General and Professor Chalia spoke about, for instance, the peacekeeping forces, military training, and so on. The two finest examples of structured training of an entire army in Africa, the best results, which have been studied by other countries, are the Indian Army training team in Botswana and the Indian Army training team in Lesotho, both of which I was associated with.
Right.
They did such a wonderful job. If I can just take a minute of your time for a story. When there was a mutiny against the government by the soldiers in Lesotho, the two countries that were tasked by the African Union to send its soldiers to quell that were the South African forces combined with the Botswana Defense Forces. The rebellion was put down, peace returned. The new government decided that instead of a ragtag riffraff army which was prone to erupt at any time, they needed a professional, what came to be called an apolitical, citizen-friendly professional army. They looked around and found that the Botswana Defense Forces, who had come in along with the South Africans, performed their tasks professionally in that very fragile situation.
Right.
When they asked questions, they found that it was because they had been trained by the Indian Army training team. Now, South Africa, on independence, had decided when they wanted to integrate the army, the ANC irregulars, the fighters, the ANC guerrillas had to be integrated into a professional army, which was mainly white officers and black men.
Right.
The NCOs and so on. The British, and there's no two ways of putting it, the British did a lousy job. They were racist. They really couldn't handle the race equations and so on. They tried to impose a completely foreign paradigm into the training of the South African forces, and it didn't work, which is why the Lesotho government came to India and said, you send a team, and we sent a 14-member team which has completely transformed the Lesotho Defense Forces. So, well, that was an aside which I couldn't resist. But the way forward is for India to actually take what's on the ground and do much more. We tend to get impressed by the fact that we've given $1 billion. Most African countries are awash with credit. People don't realize that. People think that because we are given a few $1 billion in credit, Africa should, give us all its business on a plate. It is not going to happen like that.
Absolutely.
The private sector has to be much more aggressive. And let me point out a few negatives since we are all...
I'm sorry to cut you short, Ambassador, because we're running out of time. But what you're suggesting is build on the positives and build on what we already have on the ground and don't take Africa for granted is what you're suggesting. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of India as well. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. You can share your feedback with us at indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.